Guess the old man forgot how to load. The dry click echoed across the range, sharp and hollow, swallowed by the wide Carolina sky as a few scattered chuckles followed it, low and confident, the kind of laughter that came from men who had never been wrong in public before, men who wore their skill like armor and their reputation like a second skin. Ryan Mercer lowered his rifle just enough to glance sideways, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth as the others shifted behind him. Boots grinding lightly against gravel, optics glinting under the late afternoon sun, and there he stood, just off the firing line where he didn't belong, an old man in a faded field jacket that had seen better decades, hand steady at his sides, posture relaxed but not weak, not lost, just still, like he was waiting for something no one else could hear. Mercer exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. Range is restricted, sir, he called out, voice edged with mock courtesy. You're about 50 yards too close to somewhere you shouldn't be. A few of the younger operators shifted, watching, sensing entertainment. One of them muttered, probably wandered off the parking lot. Another added, or the museum, and the laughter came easier now, lighter, because it cost nothing to dismiss a man who didn't fight back. But the old man didn't move, his eyes weren't on them, not really, they were tracking something else entirely, the flags downrange maybe, or the way the heat shimmer bent the horizon just enough to lie. Mercer noticed it. Then, that lack of reaction, not fear, not confusion, just absence of interest, and something about it bothered him more than it should have. You hear me? Mercer stepped closer, boots deliberate now, authority filling the space between them. This isn't a public tour. The old man finally looked at him, and for a second, just a fraction, Mercer felt like he'd said something unnecessary, like interrupting someone mid-thought. The man's eyes were pale, clear, not cloudy with age but sharpened by it, like glass worn smooth by time. I heard you, the old man said quietly, voice low, gravel without strain. Then you should probably move, Mercer replied, shrugging his rifle slightly as if the conversation had already ended, but it hadn't, not for the others. One of them circled slightly, glancing at the man's jacket, the stitching along the shoulder, the worn outline where something used to be. You lose your badge, old-timer, he said, reaching out just enough to tap the fabric lightly, not aggressive, just dismissive, like brushing dust off something that didn't matter. The old man's gaze dropped for a moment, not to the hand, but to the place it touched, and something shifted, not in his expression, but in the air around him, subtle, like pressure before a storm you couldn't see yet. Mercer caught it without understanding it, irritation flickering where amusement had been. All right, he said, louder now, for the benefit of everyone watching, let's make this simple. He gestured toward the rifle rack, toward the steel silhouette far downrange, barely visible in the shimmer. You want to stand here, you earn it. Another laugh, sharper this time. 1,200 yards, Mercer added, tone turning almost playful. No excuses. And just like that, the line was drawn, not out of anger, not out of necessity, but because somewhere deep down, Mercer wanted to see the old man fail, needed to restore the balance he thought had shifted, and the old man simply looked past him, out into the distance, where the wind moved in layers no machine could read, and for the first time, no one laughed. The rifle rested in his hands like it had never belonged to anyone else, not new, not old, just familiar, as if time had chosen to pass around it instead of through it. Ethan Cole did not rush, did not adjust his stance to impress anyone. He simply stepped forward into position with a quiet certainty that felt out of place on a range built for precision instruments and digital confirmations. Ryan Mercer folded his arms, watching closely now, the smirk still there but thinner, stretched over. Something less comfortable. You are going to want to use the scope, one of the operators called out, half helpful, half mocking. That target is over 3/4 of a mile, another added, tapping the side of his helmet where advanced optics fed real-time data. Wind is shifting every 10 seconds out there. But Ethan did not respond. He did not even bring the rifle fully to his shoulder yet. His eyes moved first, slow, deliberate, scanning the range in layers, not left to right but near to far, as if reading something written in the air itself. The flags were not aligned. One near the firing line snapped lightly from right to left, but further out another hung heavier, dragging in the opposite direction, and beyond that, barely visible. The heat rising off the ground twisted the space above it, bending light, bending truth. Mercer noticed the pause and scoffed quietly. He is guessing, he muttered, though he knew guessing did not look like that. Guessing was quick, uncertain. This was something else entirely. Ethan shifted his weight just an inch, boot settling into gravel with a soft crunch that seemed louder than it should have been. His left hand adjusted along the rifle stock, not searching for comfort but returning to it, like a motion practiced so many times it no longer required thought. One of the younger operators leaned toward Mercer, whispering, "He is stalling," but Mercer did not answer, because the longer the silence stretched, the less it felt like hesitation. And the more it felt like control. Ethan finally raised the rifle, smooth, unforced, the barrel aligning not with the obvious but with something unseen between here and there. He did not rush the breath, did not force stillness, he simply existed within it, and for a brief moment, the range itself seemed to quiet, not physically, but perceptually, as if every small movement had been accounted for, every variable acknowledged without needing to be named. Specialist Daniel Hayes, standing just behind the line, felt it before he understood it, that subtle shift in presence, the way the older man's stillness carried weight instead of emptiness. Hayes had seen confident shooters, had seen experts calculate and adjust and correct, but this was different. There was no visible calculation, no external dependency, just a quiet alignment between man, rifle, and distance. Mercer exhaled sharply, breaking his own tension. "Any day now," he said, louder, reclaiming the moment for himself and the others. A few chuckles followed, but they were thinner now, less certain. Ethan's finger rested along the trigger, not pressing, not hovering, just waiting, as if time itself needed to catch up to him, and then, without announcement, without flourish, the rifle discharged, a single controlled report cutting clean through the air, not loud, not dramatic, just final. The sound traveled out, disappearing into distance, and for a fraction of a second, nothing happened, no immediate reaction, no visible confirmation, just silence stretching thin across 1,200 yards, and in that silence, something changed, not on the target, not yet, but in the men watching, because for the first time, none of them were smiling. The sound reached them a heartbeat later, a distant metallic ring that did not echo so much as settle, quiet and undeniable, and for a moment no one spoke, not because they did not understand what it meant, but because they were still waiting for it to not mean what it clearly did. Ryan Mercer narrowed his eyes, his head tilting slightly as if the angle might change the truth of it. "That is not possible," someone muttered behind him. Not loud enough to challenge, just enough to exist. Mercer stepped forward, reaching for the spotting scope mounted beside the line, his movements sharper now, less casual. He adjusted the focus with practiced precision, dialing in the distance until the blurred shimmer resolved into steel, and there it was, not center mass, not a lucky edge, but a clean, deliberate mark exactly where it should not have been for someone who had just been dismissed as irrelevant. Mercer pulled back from the scope slowly, his jaw tightening, the easy confidence that had filled his posture minutes ago now replaced with something quieter, heavier. He glanced at Ethan Cole, who had already lowered the rifle, not in triumph, not in relief, just returning it as if the action required no acknowledgement. "Do it again," Mercer said, the words coming out flatter than intended, less of a command and more of a need. One of the operators shifted uncomfortably. "Ryan," he started, but Mercer cut him off without looking. "Again," he repeated, louder now, reclaiming authority that felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Ethan did not respond immediately, his gaze still out there, beyond the target, beyond the obvious, as if confirming something no one else could see. Specialist Daniel Hayes felt his pulse pick up, not from excitement but from recognition, something in the back of his mind clicking into place, a memory not of a face but of a story, something told quietly, almost dismissed as exaggeration, about a man who could read distance like others read numbers, who did not rely on tools because he had become one. Hayes swallowed, his eyes moving to the older man's jacket. Again, to the faint outline on the shoulder where a patch used to sit, not standard issue, not something you could look up easily. "Sir," Hayes said carefully, stepping just close enough to be heard without drawing attention, "where did you say you were assigned?" Ethan turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the question, his expression unchanged. "A long time ago," he said, and then nothing more, but the way he said it carried weight, not evasive, not proud, just final. Hayes felt it settle in his chest, that quiet certainty that this was not coincidence, not luck. Mercer exhaled sharply, frustration creeping into his tone. "You hit one shot," he said, gesturing toward the range as if dismissing it would restore balance. "That does not make you." He stopped himself, the word he was about to use suddenly feeling inadequate, incomplete. Ethan shifted slightly, adjusting his stance again, not to prove anything, just because he had been asked, and in that small movement, Hayes made his decision, stepping back from the line, his hand already reaching for the secure phone clipped at his side, his thumb hovering for just a second before pressing the call. The line connected quickly. A voice on the other end, crisp, controlled. Operations, Hayes kept his voice low, controlled, but there was an edge to it now, something urgent beneath the discipline. Sir, I need you to verify a name. A pause. Then, go ahead. Hayes glanced once more at the man on the line, at the stillness that no longer felt ordinary. Ethan Cole, he said, and for the first time since the shot, something moved faster than the wind across that range, not in the air, but through the chain of command. The voice on the other end of the line did not respond immediately, and that silence carried more weight than any answer could have. Specialist Daniel Hayes felt it travel through the connection like a pressure drop, subtle but unmistakable. Repeat the name, the voice finally said, slower now, no longer routine. Hayes kept his eyes on Ethan Cole, who stood at the line as if nothing had changed, as if the shot had not shifted the air around them. Ethan Cole. Hayes repeated, each word. Deliberate, and this time the silence that followed was different. Not uncertainty, but recognition, sharp and controlled. Stand by, the voice said. And the line did not disconnect, it held, open, active, as if whatever was happening next required witnessing. Hayes lowered the phone slightly but did not move it away from his ear. Around him the range continued in fragments, boots shifting, equipment adjusting, but the rhythm had been broken. Ryan Mercer watched Ethan more closely now, no longer amused, no longer dismissive. There was calculation in his eyes. The kind reserved for problems that did not fit the expected model. You said you have done this before, Mercer said, not quite a question, not quite a challenge. Ethan did not look at him, his attention still stretched out across distance and heat and invisible currents. Something like that, he replied, the same quiet tone, unchanged, and that consistency unsettled Mercer more than defiance would have, because there was nothing to push against, no ego to provoke, no reaction to dominate, just presence, steady and immovable. One of the operators stepped closer to Mercer. Lowering his voice, we should clear this, he said, nodding subtly toward Ethan. If he is not cleared to be here. Mercer shook his head once, cutting him off, his pride not yet ready to release control. He stays until I say otherwise, Mercer replied, but even as he said it, the authority behind the words felt thinner, like something already being overridden somewhere else. Hayes felt the shift before anyone announced it. The tone in his earpiece changed. Voices layering behind the one he was connected to, clipped, precise, moving faster than standard protocol. Confirm visual, the voice said, and Hayes understood immediately. Male, late 70s, grey hair, field jacket, no visible insignia. Hayes answered, keeping his voice level. He is at the primary firing line. There was another pause, shorter this time, followed by a second voice, deeper, older, stepping into the line without introduction. Do not engage. The new voice said, each word measured, absolute. Hayes straightened slightly, instinct responding before thought. Yes sir, he said, the acknowledgement automatic, even though the man on the other end had not identified himself. Around him, nothing had changed yet. Mercer still stood in control of the range, the operators still held their positions, but Hayes knew, with a clarity that settled into his chest, that control had already shifted, just not visibly, not yet. Ethan adjusted the rifle again, not hurried, not reactive, just continuing as if the moment belonged to him and always had. Mercer watched that movement and felt something unfamiliar settle in his gut, not fear, not respect, not yet, but the beginning of both. Take the shot, Mercer said, quieter this time, not a command shouted across authority, but something closer to a request he could not afford to admit. Ethan did not acknowledge the words, he simply aligned again, breath steady, posture unchanged, and Hayes, standing just behind the line with the phone still pressed to his ear, heard the voice return, clearer now, unmistakable in its authority. Hold that position, it said, and then, after the briefest pause, the order that cut through everything else, calm, controlled, and final, I am on my way. The second shot came without warning, not announced, not prepared for, just a continuation of something already in motion. The rifle settled into Ethan Cole's shoulder with the same quiet certainty, his breathing unchanged, his gaze steady, and when the trigger broke this time, the sound felt smaller, almost restrained, as if the act itself required no emphasis. The report carried across the range and disappeared into the same shifting air that had misled every instrument on the line that morning. Ryan Mercer did not move immediately, he did not reach for the scope, did not speak, He simply stood there, eyes fixed forward, as if refusing to chase confirmation would somehow delay what he already knew. One of the operators broke first, stepping in quickly, adjusting the spotting scope with sharper movements than before, urgency replacing confidence. He leaned in, focused, and then froze, not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but enough that the man behind him noticed. "Well?" someone asked, the question hanging in the space between expectation and realization. The operator pulled back slowly, his expression no longer amused, no longer skeptical, just quiet. "Same place," he said, and that was all. No embellishment, no explanation, just a fact that did not need decoration. Mercer exhaled, long and controlled, but it did not release the tension. It only revealed how much of it had built beneath the surface. He stepped forward, taking the scope himself this time. Dialing in with precise, practiced movements, the glass brought the distant steel into sharp focus, and there it was again, not scattered, not corrected, but repeated, deliberate, as if distance itself had become irrelevant. Mercer lowered the scope slowly, his mind moving through every explanation he trusted: wind drift, barrel variance, environmental distortion, and one by one they failed to hold, not because they were wrong, but because they were insufficient. He turned his head slightly toward Ethan, studying him now not as an outsider, not as an inconvenience, but as something he did not yet understand. "Who are you?" Mercer asked, the question stripped of its earlier edge, no longer a challenge, but a gap he needed filled. Ethan did not answer immediately, his hands resting lightly on the rifle, not gripping, not claiming, just holding. "Just someone who has been out here a long time," he said, and the words did not clarify anything, but they carried a weight that made further questions feel unnecessary. Specialist Daniel Hayes felt his phone vibrate subtly against his ear, the line still open, the presence on the other end now undeniable, voices moving in controlled layers, commands being issued beyond his hearing, but he caught enough, fragments that confirmed what he had already begun to understand. Visual confirmed, someone said, followed by a pause, then another voice, unmistakable now, calm and absolute: "Keep everyone in place." Hayes straightened slightly, his posture aligning with the gravity of the moment. "Yes, sir," he replied quietly. Around him, the range had shifted without anyone announcing it. Conversations had stopped, movements had slowed, even the wind seemed less distracting, as if attention itself had narrowed around a single point. Mercer took a step back from the scope, his authority no longer something he could lean on comfortably, not gone, but no longer unquestioned. One of the operators leaned toward him again, voice low. "We should stand this down," he said. And this time Mercer did not dismiss it immediately. He hesitated, just a fraction, enough for Hayes to notice, enough for the balance to tilt further. Ethan adjusted his stance slightly, not preparing for another shot, but settling, as if his part in this moment was already complete, and in the distance, beyond the visible edge of the range, a low mechanical hum began to build, faint at first, almost mistaken for wind, but steady, approaching, carrying with it a presence that did not need to be seen to be felt. Hayes closed his eyes for a brief second, recognizing the sound before anyone else reacted, and when he opened them again, the range no longer felt like it belonged to Ryan Mercer or his team. It belonged to whoever was about to arrive. The sound grew louder now, no longer mistaken for wind, a steady rotor rhythm cutting through the open air with controlled authority, and one by one, heads began to turn, not in panic, not in confusion, but in recognition, because that sound did not belong to routine operations, it belonged to command presence. Ryan Mercer straightened instinctively, his posture shifting before his thoughts could catch up. The confidence he had carried all afternoon now reorganizing into something more structured, more disciplined, the kind of readiness that came from knowing someone above you had just entered the equation. The helicopter came into view over the far tree line, low and deliberate, not rushing, not dramatic, just arriving exactly when it intended to. The downdraft followed seconds later, sweeping across the range in a controlled wave that lifted dust and fabric and loose gravel into motion, but Ethan Cole did not move. His stance unchanged, as if the environment adjusted around him instead of the other way around. Specialist Daniel Hayes lowered the phone slightly, the line still open, but no longer necessary. "He is here," the voice on the other end said, and then the connection ended, clean and immediate. Hayes slipped the device back into place, his attention fully forward now. The helicopter touched down beyond the marked perimeter, precise, efficient, the rotor slowing but not stopping completely. And before the motion had fully settled, the door opened, a single figure stepping out, no hesitation, no wasted movement, the uniform crisp, the presence unmistakable even at a distance. Colonel Jonathan Reeves did not look around to orient himself, he already knew where he was going, his path direct, cutting across the space between command and consequence without deviation. The operators on the line adjusted subtly, shoulders tightening, feet aligning, not ordered, not instructed. Just responding to the gravity of his arrival. Mercer took a step forward, then stopped, unsure for the first time where exactly he stood in the sequence of events. Reeves closed the distance steadily, his eyes fixed ahead, not scanning, not evaluating, but locking onto a single point, Ethan Cole, and nothing else seemed to register in his focus. Hayes felt it again, that shift, stronger now, as if the entire range had been redefined by a single line of authority. Conversations had ceased entirely, even the small background movements had faded into stillness. The only sound now was the diminishing rotation of the helicopter blades behind them, and the measured steps of a man who did not need to raise his voice to be heard. Reeves stopped several feet from Ethan, not too close, not distant, the space between them deliberate, respectful, and for a brief moment, no one spoke. Not Mercer, not the operators, not even Hayes. Because something about that silence felt structured, intentional, as if it was part of the protocol itself. Reeves studied Ethan with a calm, controlled expression, not surprise, not doubt, but confirmation, like seeing something he had already believed to be true. Ethan met his gaze without reaction, without adjustment, just present, just steady, and in that exchange, something passed between them that no one else on that range could fully interpret. Mercer felt it without understanding it. A shift deeper than rank, deeper than protocol, something rooted in recognition rather than authority. Reeves drew a slow breath, his posture aligning with something more formal now, not rigid, not performative, just precise, and when he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried across the entire range with absolute clarity. "Stand down," he said, and every movement stopped completely, not because they were told to, but because the order left no room for anything else. The word did not echo, it settled, heavy and absolute, and everything obeyed it without hesitation. Ryan Mercer felt his shoulders lock into place before he could think, his grip loosening on authority he had carried so confidently just minutes ago. Colonel Jonathan Reeves did not look at him, not yet. His focus remained entirely on Ethan Cole, the space between them still untouched by interruption. As if the rest of the range had been temporarily erased from relevance, a slow breath moved through Reeves as he straightened fully, and then, without ceremony, without announcement, he brought his hand up in a clean, deliberate motion, a salute that was not casual, not symbolic, but precise, earned, and for the first time that day, Ethan moved in response to someone else, his posture adjusting slightly, not out of obligation, but recognition, and he returned it, just as controlled, just as exact. The exchange lasted only a moment, but it carried a weight that pressed into every person watching. Mercer felt it land in his chest like something he could not deflect, not because of rank, but because of what it meant. Reeves lowered his hand slowly, his expression unchanged, but his voice, when it came, carried something deeper than command. "You should not have been left unannounced," he said, not accusing, not questioning, simply stating a failure that did not belong to Ethan. A quiet acknowledgement that something had been mishandled before he arrived. Ethan gave the slightest shake of his head, dismissing the concern with the same quiet ease he had shown all afternoon. "It is not a problem," he replied, and there was no resentment in it, no need for correction, just acceptance. Reeves nodded once, as if that answer confirmed something he already expected. Then, and only then, did he shift his attention, turning slightly toward Ryan Mercer and the operators behind him. The movement was small, but it changed the entire dynamic of the range. Mercer straightened instinctively, his stance now aligned with regulation rather than confidence. "Sir," Mercer began, his voice controlled but tighter than before, "we were not informed." Reeves raised a hand, not sharply, not aggressively, just enough to stop the explanation before it formed, and Mercer fell silent immediately, not out of fear, but because the interruption carried clarity. Reeves stepped forward one pace, closing a fraction of the distance, his eyes steady on Mercer. "Now, you were informed," Reeves said calmly, and the words landed without volume but with precision. "You were informed the moment he stepped onto your range." Mercer felt the shift in those words, the implication settling into place, that recognition was part of the responsibility, not something granted afterward. He swallowed once, his response delayed by the weight of it. "Yes, sir," he said finally, the answer quieter than anything he had spoken earlier. Behind him, the operators stood completely still, no movement, no commentary. their earlier confidence replaced with something more grounded, more aware. Specialist Daniel Hayes remained just behind the line, watching, understanding now why the name had traveled so quickly through channels that rarely reacted without verification. Reeves let the silence stretch for a moment longer, not as punishment, but as completion, ensuring the shift had fully taken hold. Then he turned back slightly toward Ethan, his tone returning to something less formal, but less respectful. "We have a vehicle ready, sir," he said. "Whenever you are ready." Ethan glanced once more downrange, not checking, not measuring, just acknowledging the space he had occupied, and then he nodded, a simple motion that carried no urgency, no need to extend the moment further, because for him, it had never been about proving anything at all. It had only been about standing where he always had. And when he stepped away from the line, no one spoke, not because they were ordered to remain silent, but because none of them felt qualified to break it. The gravel shifted softly under Ethan Cole's boots as he stepped away from the firing line, not hurried, not delayed, just moving with the same quiet control that had defined every second of his presence there. Colonel Jonathan Reeves fell into step beside him without signaling it, not escorting, not leading, simply matching pace as if the distance between them had already been agreed upon long before either of them arrived. Behind them the range remained frozen in a silence that no one had been ordered to maintain. Ryan Mercer stood exactly where he had been, but everything about him had changed, his posture still straight, still disciplined, but stripped of the edge that had once defined it, replaced now with something more grounded, more aware. His eyes followed Ethan, not out of suspicion, but out of a need to understand what he had just witnessed. One of the operators shifted slightly, as if about to speak, but stopped, the moment no longer belonging to commentary. Specialist Daniel Hayes remained just behind the line, watching the two figures move across the range, his mind still processing the weight of a name that had traveled faster than protocol. He had read files, seen fragments of reports that were never complete, references to operations without locations, outcomes without details, and one name that appeared only when something had gone beyond standard explanation: Ethan Cole. Never attached to rank in the usual sense, never framed within a unit that could be easily traced, just present in the margins of records that were not meant to be fully understood. Hayes exhaled slowly, realizing that the stories had never been exaggerated, they had been incomplete. Mercer finally moved, just a single step forward, then another, not chasing, not interrupting, but closing enough distance to speak without raising his voice. "Sir," he said, the word directed not at Reeves, but at Ethan, and the shift in that alone carried more meaning than anything else he had said that day. Ethan paused, turning slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the voice. Mercer held that moment carefully, aware now that words mattered more than volume. "I did not recognize you," he said, not as an excuse, not as a defense, but as a statement of fact. Ethan studied him for a brief second, not judging, not correcting, just seeing him as he was now, not as he had been earlier. "You were not supposed to," Ethan replied, and there was no bitterness in it, only a quiet truth that settled cleanly into the space between them. Mercer nodded once, accepting it, because there was nothing else to do, no argument that could reshape what had already been revealed. Reeves glanced at Mercer briefly, not to challenge him, not to diminish him, but to confirm that the moment had reached its natural end. Then his attention returned forward, the helicopter waiting beyond the range, its rotor now slowed to a low, steady rhythm, the vehicle nearby already positioned, efficient, prepared, but secondary to the presence it was meant to carry. Ethan resumed walking, his steps unchanging, as if the entire sequence had been just another quiet point along a much longer path, and as he passed beyond the boundary of the firing line, the space he left behind did not feel empty, it felt defined, marked by something that could not be measured in distance or recorded in standard reports. Hayes watched until the two figures reached the edge of the range, until the sound of the helicopter began to reclaim the air, and only then did the world seem to return in fragments, small movements resuming, breaths releasing. But no one spoke immediately, because some moments did not require explanation, they required recognition. And that recognition lingered in the silence long after Ethan Cole stepped out of sight. The helicopter lifted slowly, not in a rush, not in spectacle, just rising with the same controlled precision that had defined its arrival, the rotor wash sweeping across the range one final time before pulling away into the open sky, and as it did, the sound that had filled the air began to fade, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before, not empty, but occupied by everything that had just occurred. Ryan Mercer remained where he stood, eyes fixed on the space where Ethan Cole had disappeared, his mind replaying the moment not as a sequence of events, but as a correction, something that had quietly shifted his understanding of what skill looked like, what experience meant, and what it did not need to announce. One of the operators finally exhaled, a slow release that seemed to signal permission for the others to move again. Boots shifted, equipment was adjusted, but the usual rhythm did not return immediately because something had changed beneath it, something that could not be reset by routine. Specialist Daniel Hayes stepped forward toward the firing line, his gaze moving out across the 1,200 yards that had started it all, the target still standing in the distance, unchanged, but now carrying a different meaning, not as a challenge, not as a measure, but as a reminder. He glanced down briefly at the ground where Ethan had stood, the imprint of boots already fading back into the gravel, leaving no mark that could be preserved, only the memory of precision that had required no witness to be valid. Mercer finally turned, his posture steady but quieter, less defined by dominance and more by reflection. He looked at Hayes for a moment, as if considering a question he no longer needed to ask, then shifted his attention back to the line. "Reset the range," he said, his voice even, controlled, but different, stripped of the earlier edge, and the operators moved, not with urgency, but with discipline, each action measured, deliberate, as if the standard had just been raised without anyone needing to say it out loud. Hayes nodded slightly to himself, understanding that what had happened here would not be written in any official report, not in full, not in a way that captured what it had actually been. Because some things were not meant to be documented, they were meant to be carried. The range slowly returned to motion, targets adjusted, scopes recalibrated, data checked and rechecked, but no one joked, no one dismissed. The tone had shifted in a way that did not require enforcement, it simply existed now. Mercer stepped back into position, lifting his rifle once more, but this time his eyes moved differently, not just reading numbers, not just trusting the tools at his disposal, but searching for something beyond them, something he had seen for only a few minutes and could not ignore anymore. The wind moved across the range again, subtle, layered, complex, and for the first time, he did not rush to solve it. He watched, he waited, he listened, and in that pause, something new began to take shape, not replacing what he knew, but expanding it, and far above, already disappearing into distance, the helicopter carried with it a man who had never needed to prove anything, because his presence alone had already done it. And down below, on a quiet training range that would look the same to anyone passing by, the lesson remained, not spoken, not written, but understood, that respect is not given to the loudest voice or the newest skill. It is earned quietly, carried over time, and revealed only when it matters most.